What's up, freaks? This is just me, and today we're looking at the biggest bodybuilders pound for pound. So, we're looking at the heaviest and also thickest looking competitors, proportionately to their height. So, not only are we gonna be seeing some real 300-pound giants in this video, but also some incredibly thickly developed, muscle-bound, shorter competitors. So, let's see if this video is interesting. I certainly hope so. I just thought this might be a good topic. Now, I tried to order this list from least impressive to most impressive as usual, but this order is going to be very arbitrary and subjective. We're mainly going to be considering contest photos of these guys, and we're going to be going after contest weights rather than off season, even though contest weights are really hard to find for some reason. But I'm going to be ranking this list based on my own opinion of how muscular they actually look, not their weight, because it's just confusing with the weights. And I would love to start with an honorable mention, deserves a shout out in my opinion, and that's the Mutant, Nick Walker. He's so impressive for a newcomer. I mean, he just won the Arnold Classic on his first try. He's 5'7", and I believe close to 250 pounds on stage, so I just wanted to mention him because he's got potential like no other at this point, as I see it in today's era. He's one of the most stocky and thick and muscular bodybuilders, and his conditioning was also unreal, so it's not like he's a huge blob of muscle. And now let's start the real countdown. We got a great example of a bodybuilder that looked 100 times better at the gym than on stage. It's Dennis the Menace James. He is a bodybuilder from the late 90s, 2000s, and early 2010s. He finished fourth in the 2003 Olympia performance, and his best win would probably be the 09 Tampa Pro. He was, I believe, 5'8", so not too tall, but not a dwarf either. And he apparently weighed up to 265 in competition, although don't quote me on that because there's a lot of misinformation about these weights on the internet. But whatever, just take a look at him in these photos. Here he is again, and even though in actual competition he was a lot smaller and less impressive than in the off season, you can not really deny he still looks very thick and well developed. I mean, he looks so massive either way, especially in the side chest. He's super impressive. Look how wide he is and how thick he looks too. But even in the front double, look at the size of his guns. Even though it has to be said, he's not the most conditioned. And he looks great in the most muscular. Either way, he's just a real good blend between a giant killer and a mass monster, if you ask me. Alright, and here's a couple of pictures that are off stage, really freaky, in which it's apparent how much potential Dennis really had. Really freakish, if you ask me. For sure, very muscle bound. He looks like a very big guy here. And next up, we have an odd man out, as we're gonna see later, because in the 9th place position is the giant Greg Kovacs. He comes from the late 90s and then early 20s. I believe he was 6'4" tall, which is super tall, any way you look at it, especially for a bodybuilder. And he weighed 330 pounds in contests. That's insanely heavy. He's very similar to Victor Richards though. He didn't really compete. He only entered 6 bodybuilding contests, to my knowledge, and in my opinion, there was really only a few in which he looked good, because towards the end of his career he was close to 400 pounds, which is, as you can imagine, it basically ruined his physique. Anyway, we can see in these pictures he looks amazing. He has very good flow actually, but he's also really massive. His muscle mass is unreal because of how big his frame is especially, and he's packing an insane amount of muscle on that frame. Not really looking that freakish here, but looking huge for sure, there's no question. Here he is much less shredded. He looks much more freaky too, and he's got crazy looking arms. So I wanted to include this very big bodybuilder. And now we have our 8th place finisher, even though it doesn't really matter as I said, and that's the colossal Nasser Al Body. Of course, he is from the 90s. His highest placing at the Olympia was second in 1997, but I have to say he should have won probably. I don't really know, but in my opinion, the mandatories were going half of them to Dorian Yates, half of them to Nasser, and Dorian had much more flaws than Nasser. But that's another topic, so let's just move on. His best win would be the 1999 Arnold Classic or the 97 Night of Champions. That was also a big competition. Nasser was 5'11", not too short and not too tall, and he weighed up to 290 pounds on stage. So the professor was one of the premium mass monsters of the 90s, and pound for pound, I think he was the most impressive. So take another look at him. He's an absolute monster. Just the size of Nasser was quite impressive. He was massive in the upper body, the guns were huge, and in the legs too. He had quite huge legs. You can take a look at that in the front double biceps pose. And also his thickness in the side chest pose looks quite crazy. So needless to say, the amount of muscle on him is very impressive, even though he was also pretty aesthetic for being a mass monster. And Nasser outside the stage was just as impressive. He looked humongous, but not bloated or soft at all. He's decently conditioned in these photos, so he looks great. And in 7th, we have Branch Warren. He was competing in the 2000s and 2010s era, and he finished second at the 2009 Olympia, which again it's debatable if he should have, but he did. And he also won the Arnold Classic 2 times, which is a really solid career. Branch was pretty short, standing at just 5'6" and weighing 255 at his biggest, as far as I was able to find on the internet. So Branch might not look as freaky, but you have to take into account he was much more grainy and vascular and conditioned. Even when he's this dialed in, he still looks so thickly developed, especially through the lower body, which might just be the best of all time. And the chest looks really thick and good too. You can just see how much muscle he's packing when you look at him in the side chest pose, right? So he's really much of a giant killer because he's built like a mass and conditioning king. And off stage, he doesn't look as huge as the other entries, but he looks much more veiny and cut in these pictures. So we can appreciate that too. I hope you're gonna agree that being conditioned and massive is obviously harder than just being massive, right? And in 6th place position, we have Victor Richards. Victor Richards was a bodybuilding sensation of the 1990s, but he only competed in 5 competitions in his entire bodybuilding career. And none of them was a pro contest, so he never turned pro. His best win would have been the 1992 Nigerian Championships, in my opinion, which is a huge loss of potential, certainly. But either way, he stood at 5'10", which is pretty tall actually for a bodybuilder, like normal height. And he came in shows at 300 pounds. So he was very massive, very massive. But also, once again, consider his conditioning wasn't even close to some of the others on this video, such as Branch Warren we saw previously. In these pictures, you can see in comparison with today's competitors, he's soft, but his condition is not that bad at all. He's got some separation, but still he's not in proper contest shape, which is why he places toward the bottom of this list still. But we can all marvel at these huge arms and quads. He even has a really nice midsection. Look at that. You can tell me this guy didn't have one of the most muscle-bound bodies of all time. He definitely did. And not like he wasn't off stage in the other pictures, but here is in off-season mode. He looks very soft, but the sheer size of him, that's just unbelievable either way. His muscles are so full and round, it looks unreal. Alright, move on to 5th place overall. We got the King Ronnie Coleman dashing in from the 90s and 2000s. And Big Ron is of course an 8-time Mr. Olympia, 1998 to 2005. We all know that. These are all his best wins. He's probably the best bodybuilder of all time on that note. He was about 5'11", which is on the higher end of the spectrum in this video. Even though it's not really that tall. It's not like he's a basketball player or anything. It's certainly not too tall to the point where he would look lanky. At Ronnie's biggest, he was, I believe, at least 290, which is crazy huge. Look at him, how incredibly thin Ronnie's skin looks, even at close to 300 pounds, which just makes him look like an alien, because he's so incredibly large, but also shredded. It's all muscle he's packing, there's no fat. He's definitely very thickly developed in virtually all his body parts. The size of his arms, his lats, and his whole lower body is on a complete another level from any other competitor in history, probably. And these more off-season pics once again show how full and big his body truly is. Ronnie looks like a monster. If you saw him in person, you probably couldn't even believe it. He's crazy and so dominant, how thick he is and how much muscle he had, so I obviously had to include him. But moving on to 4th, who could this be? It's the German giant Markus Rühl. Markus Rühl is a competitor from the late 1990s and the 2000s. He was able to place 5th at the 04 Olympia, the Super Bowl of bodybuilding, and his best win is the legendary 2002 Night of Champions. Markus Rühl is 5'10", so good height for a professional IBB pro, and he weighed up to 285 pounds. That is very, very large. Now, in these pictures you can also see why I have Markus in this placing on the list. He just looks like a shredded mass monster freak. Look how big he looks in the side chest. His pecs are crazy full and huge. And look at his most muscular too. Markus looks like he can barely put his wrists together. He's so muscular he can't even do it. In the front double biceps, he's putting his mountain peak biceps on display, and he looks very blocky and very big. What's the most impressive to me is the size of Markus's body compared to his little head. These photos look completely photoshopped, which I don't think they are. It has to be said though, he was not that conditioned most of the time. But he's definitely not in off-season, right? But in the off-season, outside this stage, Markus Rühl also looked like a freak. Nobody could deny that. He's got an awesome wide frame and he did a great job packing all this muscle on it. Although he doesn't look aesthetic or even well put together at all, he looks like he came from another planet, which is the point of this video, sort of. Moving on to 3rd, we got the Predator Kai Green from the 2000s and 2010s. He came close to winning the Olympia and finished runner-up 3 total times, 2012 to 2014. And he's also a 3rd-time Arnold Classic victor. Now, he might not look as huge as some of the entries before him, like Markus Rühl, but he's proportionally bigger than them because he's shorter. He's only 5'7", which is not that tall at all. He weighed 275 pounds at his largest and heaviest, at least to my knowledge, and that sounds just unreal. Now, Kai is a very freaky bodybuilder. He's got a decent frame and he's got a lot of muscle and some very standout features like his soaring peaks of his biceps, or Guy's crazy developed quads and wings, which are very apparent in the rear double biceps pose, for instance. He looks super freaky because he's so thick. All his muscle is crazy thickly developed, especially the lower body. In the side chest pose, Guy is insanely thick downstairs. His side legs is one of the most massive, if not the most massive of all time. Just unbelievable. He's just holding on to more muscle than almost anyone in the history, in my opinion, when we account for the height difference between these different bodybuilders. And outside of the stage, he's not that huge because he doesn't get soft. He's holding on to a pretty shredded shape, at least in these pictures. Look at the photo on the right. It looks totally impossible to be real, but I believe it is. And let's look at runner-up in this video, and that's our favorite Big Ramy. He is of course a current competitor. He competed in the 2010s and he keeps going. And he just won the Olympia contest, which was amazing for him. And that is by far his biggest accomplishment in bodybuilding. Ramy is 5'10", and believe it or not, he is at least 295 on stage in good shape. Not that soft. That's why he is so impressive, because he's just as big as, for example, Ronnie Coleman, but he's an inch shorter than him. Ramy is incredibly muscular, and for being that, he looks really good, because he's got one of the best frames for bodybuilding of all time. He carries all his mass with gusto. He's got slabs of meat all over his physique. Most of it would be in his quads, which are absolutely gargantuan. They are way too big and overdeveloped. But that only serves to give Ramy his wow factor element. You can really notice them in virtually every pose. But also Ramy's chest, his delts, not bad at all. One of the best of all time, in fact. And he's got a trim waist to boot, but we care more about the muscle mass in this video. No doubt he's carrying an absolutely unbelievable amount of it. And also, in the off-season, he probably looks more massive than anyone else has ever looked in history, while still looking good, not blowing out his midsection completely or having a bad physique. Look at the size of all his muscles compared to his head. Man, can you even perceive that? He's so packed with muscle everywhere. He's just an example of a modern day mass monster, right on this display. But there's one more guy in this video, my number one, and although you might not agree, in my opinion, I have the beast Rolly Winkler ahead of him. He's a current competitor who has been competing from the start of the 2010s. Rolly once placed third at the O, and he won an Arnold Classic Australia, so that's no easy feat. He's only 5'6", although he's closer to 5'7", really. But it's still very short, guys, and he supposedly weighed up to 285 pounds at his heaviest weight ever. Although, as I said, don't really believe me on this one especially, because I would sooner believe Rolly's around 260 or something, but who knows? I'm not really the best at guessing weights, so maybe I'm just spewing nonsense. So tell me in the comments if you know better. And I think Rolly's physique really speaks for itself, so we don't really have to care about his weight too much. Look how insanely thick he looks from the side. He's really developed. His arms from the side are just unbeatable, and so they are from the front. Best of all time, possibly. He also holds a lot of mass in his lats, and his legs aren't bad either. He looks like an absolute freak. How supermassive for his height. In my estimation, for that, he's the most impressive bodybuilder we've ever witnessed. He looks mind-blowingly muscular, like a bodybuilder's bodybuilder. Yeah, especially in his most muscular pose. So guys, let me know down in the comment section below your opinion on this video. mainly just on the bodybuilders included because I'm not set on the order myself. It's not the point of this video anyway. The point was to showcase the most thickly developed bodybuilders that have ever walked the planet. So be sure to let me know if you like these physiques or what do you really think about it. Do you prefer the aesthetics on a bodybuilder or do you like the freaky bodybuilders? And also be sure to write a comment if I made a mistake in the weight or height of one of these guys or more of these guys. I'm sorry, but as I said, it's really hard to find these weights, so you might know better. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to watch some biggest bodybuilders videos and also like and subscribe. Enjoy the rest of your day.